Hey, what's up, guys? It's your boy Kingdom, and I'm back with another video. A few days ago, last week, I received a message, a DM from someone that attended the Chicago meet and greet event, and they told me, how that it was awesome, it was amazing, and it was great, and they got to meet people, and I asked, like, well, how was the event? How was it meeting the guys? And they said a whole bunch of great stuff and positive stuff, and then they just let me know, like, they just said it as if it was nothing. They said this happened, this happened, this happened. Scump yelled, Crimsix sucks. And I was like, wait, what? I'm kind of thinking, I didn't even say anything to them about it, but I was like, wow. I was like, I didn't know that this was that important. Like, that I didn't know that this whole thing had gotten to a point where Scump would randomly mention Crimsix sucks at a meet and greet event. And then I went on YouTube today and watched a video where someone recorded Scump saying Crimsix sucks to a crowd of people. And at that moment, and then when I saw the tweet that Crimsix deleted, where he kind of, because Scump, Kevy Skills made this whole little video. He's a guy on Twitter, if you're not on Twitter. He made this whole little video about all the drama between the two players and the two teams. And Scump tweeted it out, and then Crimsix responded and was like, oh, this is what you're doing on Valentine's Day instead of paying attention to your woman. And it made it sound kind of personal. And at that point, when I heard those two things, it kind of confirmed for me that this is not only banter. It is legitimately banter, and a lot of what we're seeing, I believe, is banter. But I think that there is legitimate beef as well. I mean, almost one of the best things that could have happened to Chicago was getting beat by Dallas in the preseason. And the hunger for Scump and for Formal and for Arcides and for Gunless and for even Envoy to get themselves in a position where they could beat Dallas on LAN and show these guys are great online, but they're not necessarily great on LAN. And then you have even the team owners getting involved. You have Hector kind of talking. He did an interview with Scump in one of his videos. He was doing a vlog, and Scump was sitting there, and he's talking about, these guys are talking too much. These guys are talking too much. You when you talk this much because of what you're doing online. And here's the funny thing. They've been there. They've been in a place where Optic was winning and beating everybody online, and then they'd show up to LAN and get second or third. And they couldn't win a tournament, but they were beating everybody online. So, and this is kind of back in the Nadeshot days, but it's interesting to me because you have Hex being passionate about his team, defending his team. Even in a Cheddar Esports interview the other day, he brought up the difference between online and LAN. And then you have Hastro, who kind of overstepped, but he's a passionate owner talking about his team. And he just went at Mike from Deserto and talked about how biased they were. And that was too far. I mean, it's interesting because I haven't necessarily seen like a public apology from Mike, and maybe he's apologized to Hector on the side. I mean, I don't think in any way that Hex, I mean, I hope not, because those guys are buddies. I hope he didn't take it personally. I don't think so. If anything we've seen is that these are two of the best and brightest owners we've ever had in the history of our esport, and they both have put together amazing rosters. Now, we can say all we want about the 9-2 record and the 3-0 record and that Chicago is the better team. They have proven that they are the better team. 3 strikes, you're out. They've proved that. But at the same time, Dallas has proved they're not a team to be slept on. They're not I almost started naming teams. I was going to say they're not Seattle, they're not New York, they're not like they have proven everything except we're better than them. And when Scump says on Twitter, Clayster kind of responded to Scump's tweets and was like, who are you saying is backpedaling and all this kind of stuff. When Scump says, you guys earned this. You literally like set up a plate and served it, and we're just giving it back to you. We're giving you all the leftovers of what you tried to give us because it wasn't real. You complained about the standings, and they were legit. You complained about power rankings, but whoever was doing the power rankings knew what they were doing. Deserto was on point. The author in the article that said Chicago was a step above Dallas, he was right. It's an unfortunate truth. Now, when Formal said in one of his interviews at London that they had gotten into their heads, I don't know how true that is for at least Clayster, who played out of his mind and was an amazing player, easily the MVP of his team at the event, was one of the top players at the event in general, who had over 1 KD in every single game mode, even though they played against the Huntsmen twice. That says something. You know, like, I think that I don't think they got into Clay's head. Did they get into Crimsix's? That's so hard to call, guys. I mean, who are we talking about here? We're talking about probably the 2 highest paid players in the CDL in Crimsix and Scump. We're talking about the player with the most championships, who probably has the highest average. I don't want to say he does because I don't know for sure. Probably has the highest average placing of any player, maybe in Call of Duty history, that's played more than 2 or 3 years. And then you have Scump, who is the most known, who is the superstar, who is the most followed and entertaining and most watched. And like we're talking about dudes that are at the top of their game in both regards. And the legitimate beef is, I don't want to play with you anymore. And I'm so happy that I'm not on your team from both of them. Crimsix has come out and said, I'm so happy I'm not playing with these dudes anymore that couldn't show up on time. And then it's kind of funny that one of the things we see in the campaign is Scump being late. and the world famous meme of Formal looking over his glasses like, you're late, like really late. And so here's the thing. And then you have Scump and all the guys from OGLA talking about how Crimsix yelled. All of it is legit. All of it. Scump and Formal have both come out and said there was some ego problems, and the biggest egos was the 2 of us. Those were the biggest egos on the team. So Crimsix, rightfully so, was frustrated playing with these guys, and they're beefing with each other. And then you have Crim, who is annoying everybody else because he's yelling at them and all that kind of stuff. And I even have seen this, like when they were playing in Seattle, literally, the tournament that none of us really want to remember. I mean, people don't want to remember 2016 because thousands of people watched Aches destroy them. But when they played in Seattle and the Dynasty was broken up, and I sat there and watched the Optic team that wasn't even on stream, and I was playing it on my Periscope, and I'm sitting there watching Damon, and I'm sitting there watching Formal and Scump and Crimsix, and they're all like dejected. You could tell it was over. I think it was LG they were playing. You could tell they were going to lose. And it's funny because you saw this little smirk on Octane's face. Like he knew he was going to be on Optic after this event. But John, I think, had the same smirk, just saying, but just didn't happen. But I'm sitting there looking at them and I'm like, dang, they look like they just lost. But you know who didn't? Crimsix. This dude was shouting. This dude was calling out. He was shouting. He was still being Crim. And it's like, when I heard any rumors about all this yelling and stuff, I was like, yeah, that's probably legit. Because I've seen Crim, when the team was at their worst, getting their worst placing. And, I mean, at that event, I didn't meet Hex. He left like a day early. I didn't get to talk. Well, I had met Hex before, but I didn't get to talk to Hex. Me and Hitch just kind of exchanged like, sup? And, and I love that guy, but I was like, yeah, I know you're going through some stuff. This team, yeah. And Crimsix just threw his controller in the bag and walked off, left before anybody else. Like, I'm sure the yelling was legitimate. I'm sure the being late to practice and all this stuff was legitimate. I'm sure all of it was legit. Sitting there waiting for people. I'm sure these 2 guys have legitimate beef with each other. They don't want to play together. And then Crimsix talks some mess and some noise, and Hastro jumps in, and one of the best things that could have happened for that team was losing to Dallas in the preseason, and it stoked a fire. And the unfortunate thing is that Crim kind of threw kindling onto that fire. He was like, yeah, take that. Yeah, I will never forgive. I will never forget. You know, just throwing stuff on there and getting in interviews and talking about how he was so happy not to play with them anymore. And you could tell Scump was like, I'm not going to talk right now because they are beating us online. You know, but then 3 strikes are out. At this point, 9-2 map record, 3-0 match. Like, why not throw some and that's where the banter comes in my opinion, because there's no way that these 2 guys don't respect each other. I don't think so. I don't think you can really lose respect for someone who helped you win I don't know, maybe half of your championships. And then both of them, like if they didn't play together, would things have turned out the same way? Would they have been a part of they together are part of the greatest roster that we've ever seen. Period. They won together. They won champs together. Now Crimsix, that wasn't his first ring, but for Scump it was. Like Crimsix definitely was a part of that. Like regardless of how much Seth and Matt want to go at Ian and Ian wants to go back at him and all this kind of stuff, they won championships together. They won champs together. They were one of the most they literally were one of the most fanned up, defended teams in the history of competitive Call of Duty. People didn't like playing them, and for years they were on top. And I don't think you can lose like mutual respect for that. And so a part of what we're seeing is legitimately banter. Even when Scump said in a campaign episode, I can't wait to beat TJ and walk across the stage and be like, GG's, and then you see him and TJ playing around on the timeline on Twitter. Do you see him and Crim playing around on the timeline? No, because there is also some legitimate beef. And unfortunately, at this point, even if Dallas beat Chicago the next time they played and Chicago lost and Dallas won the tournament, I still wouldn't say Dallas is the better team. At this point, they got to beat them like twice in a row, and they got to beat them bad and get the map count at least close. At least get it to like a 9-8 map count and a 3-2 match record, and then maybe we could say Dallas has gotten better and now they're the better team. But it's gonna take some recovery. Now, with all this being said, Merc said something very interesting on Hardpoints. He was kind of quiet, and then they're like, okay, what are you thinking, Merc? And Merc is like, I'm thinking, who cares about Dallas? If I'm Chicago, I'm paying attention to these little tiny terrors, these little dudes sitting over here, chomping at the bit, waiting to get their hands on some more teams. Because they smoked the 2 teams they played in Minnesota, and they're just waiting. And you know that these power rankings, in the same way that the fire was stoked under Chicago, these power rankings that everybody has now that's putting Chicago above Atlanta, and the only excuse we really have is they haven't played yet. And so that FaZe is sitting there like, oh my gosh, I can't wait till this home series so we can just smoke everyone, and then the questions will be answered and everybody's going to know that we are the better team. Now, if there's any team that can give FaZe a run for their money, if there's any team that's going to give them a run for their money, it's going to be Chicago. They've sped up their search and destroy, which everyone has to do now that there's 30 seconds less per round, but they've sped up their search and destroy. Scump dropped a 2.13. They're GOATs. Their search game is amazing, but they still, if you listen to the interviews, they still are going to improve on their search. And Scump said something very interesting in his interview. He was like, but they're good in respawn too. So it's like, we just have to get as good as we can. And here's the thing that I've learned about Chicago. They're not their best yet. I thought that this roster was going to come out the gate swinging, and they were going to swing as hard as they were ever going to swing. They're not their best yet. They can get better. Now, I'd say the same thing about Dallas. And that's where this is kind of a weird beef between these 2 teams, because what sucks about all of this is nobody's noticing like Dallas is top 3. Dallas is the type of team that Hastro wanted to build. They're right there, but nobody's really paying attention to how good they actually are and that they reverse swept London at home. But everybody's just, and that Clay dropped in, over 1 KD in every game type. Like everybody's just kind of paying attention to the fact that they're getting beat by Chicago. And it's going to be interesting when Dallas is at an event that Chicago's not at to see how they place, and to see what happens. And so I would say FaZe they've got a lot of fuel, and they didn't need any. That team was already like gassed up. And I said before the season starts, the only challenge for this FaZe team is, can they stay in front of everybody? We're going to find out next weekend. On Monday, Chance is going to be on my podcast with me and Icon. Landon may make it onto the show. We'll see. But it's 7:30 Eastern, and we're going to do our predictions, and we're going to talk about what we think. But I want to know, what do you guys think? Like, who's going to win that matchup, and who's the better team? Like, I know that Chicago has proved, like, they can take what they do online and be even better on LAN. And that's the problem with Dallas is they haven't been able to do that. They haven't been able to be better on land than they are online, but they've been good. They've been probably as good as they could be for the time being, and they've beat every team with the exception of the two best teams in the game. But those two best teams in the game, who's going to win between them? Like, because Atlanta, I'm telling you, man, they are just sitting there like, oh, you guys. This is funny. I mean, they're literally like, and they have something to prove. Like, we're the bully. We're the bully in the yard. You two, you guys are just the underlings. But we're going to take the lunch money that you got from them. We're going to take it from you. That's what I'm telling you, that's what Atlanta FaZe is doing right now. They're just like, okay, guys, you got this little look at this little argument. Like, they're just sitting there waiting. And like I said, Chicago has it in them. Chicago has proved. Don't underestimate us. Don't underestimate us, and do not underestimate us. If I had to say this, for what it's worth, I love both organizations. And it's hard for me to watch the beef. I love Hector. I love Hastro. They've both been, I've interviewed both of them multiple times. I've engaged with both of them. I got to meet Hex in real life, and he gave me a hug, and it was amazing. And I feel the same about Crimsix and Scump. I'm happy for both of them. The only person I'm sad for in the CDL and that was a part of that whole dynasty is Damon. And Damon just seems to always be on he's always on these dominant teams, and then after that he winds up on Envy where he can't win a tournament, or he winds up on Optic Nation where he can't win a tournament, or it's just like, or he winds up on Seattle, and it's just, or he winds up not playing at Champs and getting dropped for methods, or an Octane, and it's unfortunate for Damon. He's gonna play his best. We'll see what happens with Seattle with their roster trade, but Formal and Scump, and I guess I'm really focused here on Scump and Crimsix. They both did great in the offseason. They both landed on really good teams. They both put together really good rosters. And if I was an owner in this league, I would want one of those two players on my team. And if I could get either one of them, if I was Hastro and I knew I couldn't get Scump, but I got Crimsix, I'd be very happy and I'd be very pleased with their performance, with what they've done. They didn't get 50 points in London, but they got the second most points, and they got 30, and they had none from Minnesota. So they needed 30 or 50 points. They had to get second in that tournament, in my opinion. And if they didn't beat London in them semifinals, it was going to be a long season for Dallas. We'd start doubting them. We'd put them down below maybe London and Paris, but now we kind of put them at third because they proved they can clutch up against the other teams. They couldn't clutch up against Chicago, and Chicago was like, we got this. So you guys let me know in the comments what you think. What do you think? Who's gonna win next weekend? What's the map count when they meet in the grand finals? And it better happen. That's all I'm saying. If any of you other teams beat Chicago or Atlanta and they don't make it to the final, I'm coming after you in my commentary. Nevertheless, this is your boy Kingdom. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!